Sanberk Çelik is a Turkiye-based researcher with a background in architecture, particularly in the history, theory, and criticism of space. His work blends academic analysis with direct field experience, and he approaches subjects through a mix of environmental, spiritual, and anthropological perspectives. For his 2023 master's thesis, he conducted participant-observer research at 2 rainbow gatherings in Turkiye, 1 small gathering in the Mersin Mountains and 1 large international gathering in Antalya, documenting rituals, spatial practices, daily life, and the relationship between community and nature. His writing combines architectural thinking with experiential narrative, focusing on how people create temporary, communal, and spiritually oriented spaces outside modern urban systems. This 2023 master's thesis, looking back at nature and the natural environment in the context of spirituality-based practices of turning inwards, rainbow gatherings, explores how people try to reconnect with both nature and their inner world through spirituality, focusing on rainbow gatherings as a real-life example. First, it looks at how older cultures saw nature as sacred and alive, then explains how modern capitalism and city life turned inner life into something more consumerist, private, and cut off from the land. After that, it introduces rainbow gatherings as a kind of temporary alternative world, non-commercial, off-grid camps in the wild where people live together, cook and eat in big circles, sing, meditate, and do rituals under the open sky. The author joins 2 gatherings in Turkiye, Mersin 2021 and Antalya 2022, as a participant observer and analyzes them in 3 layers: the physical setup in nature, valleys, plateaus, kitchens, toilets, sacred fire, the lived experience of walking, sharing, and ceremonies like the full moon ritual, and finally the inner meanings people describe in interviews, how they talk about self, nature, Babylon, modern society, and the healing power of the circle. In the end, the thesis argues that rainbow gatherings create a powerful but temporary spiritual and communal space that helps people feel part of nature again, and suggests that a truly sustainable future would combine this deep, earth-based spirituality with the useful parts of modern knowledge and technology instead of rejecting one side completely. The introduction starts by describing how humans used to live much more closely connected to nature. In early societies, people experienced themselves as part of the land, the seasons, and the more than human world, and spirituality was woven into everyday life outdoors. Over time, especially with urbanization, capitalism, and modern technology, most people moved into highly built, controlled environments. This shift slowly cut many of us off from wild landscapes and also from older, nature-based forms of spirituality, replacing them with more interior, private, and often consumer-shaped ideas of the self. Against this background, the thesis sets a clear aim: to rethink inner life and spirituality in direct contact with nature, not just inside houses, churches, or therapy rooms. Instead of seeing inner experience as something that happens only in a room with 4 walls, the author asks, what happens when people turn inwards while living outdoors, in forests, valleys, and plateaus? The project wants to understand how wild nature itself can become an inner space, and how people's spiritual experiences change when they live very simply, away from modern infrastructure. From that aim, the thesis narrows down its focus to a very specific field: spirituality-based practices of turning inwards that happen in wild environments, no electricity, no concrete, no ticketed festival, just people and land. It looks especially at rainbow gatherings, where people come together to live communally in nature, meditate, sing, cook, and share rituals. The scope is not all forms of outdoor spirituality everywhere, but this particular type of gathering, treated as a living example of how inner experience, spirituality, and nature can come together. To study this, the author combines theory with direct experience. On the theory side, there is a literature review on spirituality, interiority, the inner life, and the human-nature relationship in philosophy, religion, and cultural history. On the fieldwork side, the author goes to 2 rainbow gatherings in Turkiye as a participant observer, living on site rather than watching from afar. Qualitative methods are used: field notes, sketches, diagrams, photographs, personal diary writing, and recorded interviews with other participants. All of this material is then used to build a rich, layered understanding of what it feels like to turn inward in such settings. Finally, the introduction explains how the rest of the thesis is structured. The chapters move step by step, first building the theoretical background, how spirituality and inner life have been understood historically, then looking at modern counterculture and New Age movements, then introducing rainbow gatherings as a concrete case, and finally diving into a detailed, multi-layered analysis of the 2 gatherings in Turkiye. In other words, the reader is taken from big-picture ideas to cultural context to the specific rainbow gathering world to close-up, lived experience and interpretation. Spirituality, interiority, and modernity explains how ideas of spirituality and inner life have changed across human history. It begins with prehistoric cultures, where inner experience was inseparable from the natural world and shaped by animistic beliefs that saw forests, rivers, animals, and spirits as interconnected. Over time, especially with capitalism and modern urban living, this relationship shifted. The inner self became more individualistic, pleasure-oriented, and consumer-driven. Modern architecture reinforced this trend by creating private interiors, rooms, offices, apartments, that encouraged a more isolated, inward-facing self, cut off from shared outdoor life. At the same time, interiority also developed a spiritual dimension through practices like meditation, contemplation, and self-reflection, which continued to treat the inner world as a space of personal transformation. The chapter also explores how modern societies have repeatedly tried to reconnect inner life with nature. The 1960s counterculture and hippie movements represent a major moment in this return, with people rejecting mainstream norms, forming communes, and seeking new forms of spiritual community. Out of this came alternative spiritualities, often labeled New Age, which blended elements from multiple traditions and emphasized healing, personal growth, and ecological awareness. These movements contributed to a wider re-enchantment of nature, seen in modern paganisms and earth-based spiritual practices that treat the natural world as sacred again. Taken together, these trends show a continuing desire to merge spirituality, inner experience, and the living landscape in response to the pressures of modernity. Rainbow gatherings, an alternative and holistic life model, introduces rainbow gatherings as a kind of temporary, off-grid, communal life experiment rather than an ordinary event or festival. It explains that rainbow gatherings are non-commercial, open to anyone, and built around ideals like peace, respect, sharing, and living simply in nature. People don't come as paying customers, they come as family, expected to contribute in some way: cooking, cleaning, making music, digging toilets, running workshops, or simply supporting the atmosphere of care. The chapter frames rainbow gatherings as an alternative, holistic life model, a short-term village where social, spiritual, and practical life are all mixed together. A key piece of this model is how decisions are made. Instead of having formal leaders or a central organization, rainbow gatherings use vision councils and other consensus-based circles. In these circles, people sit together, literally in a circle, and talk through questions like where the next gathering will be, how to respond to problems, or how to improve the way the camp runs. Everyone who wants to speak can do so. Decisions are made when there is broad agreement rather than a simple majority vote. This slow, sometimes messy process is seen as part of the spiritual practice, listening deeply, respecting different voices, and learning to live without rigid hierarchies. The chapter also describes who the rainbow people are and how the idea of rainbow family works. Participants come from many countries, cultures, and spiritual backgrounds, but living together in basic conditions, sharing food, fire, water, songs, and daily tasks, creates a quick and strong sense of kinship. Calling each other brother, sister, or family is not just symbolic, it reflects how people rely on each other for warmth, safety, and emotional support. Through this close communal living, many experience a temporary break from the loneliness and fragmentation they feel in their usual city or Babylon life. The chapter outlines the practical cycle of a gathering and its deep connection to nature. First, small scouting teams look for suitable land, far enough from towns, with clean water, enough space, and minimal impact on local people and ecosystems. Once a place is chosen, people slowly arrive and set up the camp, in line with a 28-day moon cycle, usually from new moon to new moon. The gathering grows, peaks, often around full moon, then slowly dissolves as people leave and a cleanup crew restores the land, aiming to leave as little trace as possible. Throughout this process, nature is not treated as a backdrop or a venue but as teacher, temple, and relative, shaping how people move, organize, and experience their inner lives during the gathering. Rainbow gatherings began in 1972 in the United States, emerging from the spirit of free festivals, anti-war movements, back to the land experiments, and the wider countercultural search for peace, community, and non-commercial forms of living. What started as an improvised gathering in nature quickly evolved into a yearly event and then expanded internationally as participants brought the model to Europe, Latin America, Asia, and eventually almost every continent. The gatherings spread not through organizations or advertising but through word of mouth, traveler networks, and handwritten invitation booklets, forming a global, loosely connected web of temporary nature-based communities. Everyday life at rainbow gatherings revolves around a non-commercial, gift-based economy where money is not used and all food and services come from voluntary contributions. Communal vegetarian or vegan meals are cooked in shared outdoor kitchens, and twice daily food circles bring everyone together to sit, hold silence, and eat as one large family. Singing, drumming, storytelling, and spontaneous workshops fill the days, while a magic hat is passed around to collect voluntary donations for shared supplies. These simple rituals, cooking together, keeping fires, sharing songs, and caring for each other, create a consistent rhythm that shapes the social and spiritual atmosphere of the gathering. Looking back at nature and the natural environment through practices of turning inwards looks at rainbow gatherings from the outside in, starting with the most physical layer, the land itself. It compares the two Turkish sites where the author did fieldwork, Mersin's narrow, steep Çogleon Valley and Antalya's wide, open Inef Plateau. The valley is enclosed by high canyon walls with a cold river running through it, creating a shady, intimate, echoing space where the sound of water is constant and sunlight is limited. The plateau, by contrast, is a huge, exposed grassland ringed by forests and mountains, with long hours of sun and big open skies. Differences in terrain, water sources, climate, and vegetation all shape how people move, gather, and feel in each place. The chapter then shows how the size of the gathering and the layout of the camp are tightly linked. The small Mediterranean gathering, with around 50 people, feels like a core family. The central fire, kitchen, and tents are all close together, and everyone quickly gets to know each other. The world gathering on Inef Plateau, with around 1,200 people at its peak, spreads out over a much larger area, almost like a temporary town. There are distinct zones: kitchen area, kids' village, music areas, quiet camping spots, and long walking paths between them. This change in scale alters the emotional atmosphere. One feels cozy and village-like, the other feels dynamic, diverse, and constantly in motion. Finally, the chapter describes the built-in symbolic structures that grow up on this natural base, forming a kind of ritual landscape. Practical elements include communal kitchens, storage and washing stations, compost toilets, earth or clay ovens, fire pits, teepees or tents, music spaces, and tea houses. These are all simple, handmade, and temporary, but together they create the basic infrastructure of daily life. Alongside them, there are more symbolic constructions inspired by different spiritual traditions: a Native American-style medicine wheel, a spiral labyrinth that people can walk for reflection, and mandala-like arrangements that echo Tibetan sand mandalas, carefully created, deeply meaningful, and ultimately dismantled. Through these features, the chapter shows how the physical layout of a rainbow gathering is already a kind of map of its inner and spiritual intentions. The second layer, spatialities formed by inner events and experiences, moves from the physical landscape into the experiential and emotional landscapes the author enters while participating in the two gatherings. The first experience, the Mediterranean gathering in Çogleon Valley, unfolds like a slow transition from everyday life into a hidden world. Traveling from Istanbul into the mountains, meeting a local villager at the canyon entrance, and following river paths past ancient ruins all act as thresholds. Walking deeper into the valley becomes a symbolic descent into a different mode of being, where the tight canyon walls, the roar of the river, and the first glimpse of the sacred fire signal the moment the author steps fully into Rainbow World. This journey shapes the author's inner state, opening him to a more receptive, attentive way of experiencing space and community. The arrival at the 2022 World Gathering on Inef Plateau is dramatically different but equally transformative. Instead of a narrow canyon, the author emerges from a forest path into an enormous fog-covered plain, with thunder, rain, and the distant glow of the central fire creating a mix of disorientation and awe. The welcome center becomes the first point of human warmth, where seasoned participants guide newcomers through the gathering's values and rhythms. Moving from the dense forest to the open plateau mirrors an inner expansion. The author describes the sense of stepping into a vast communal space where hundreds of people, and eventually over 1,000, live scattered across the rim of the plateau, each contributing to the collective energy that holds the gathering together. The full moon ceremony represents the peak of these experiential spatialities, acting as a shared moment where inner transformation and outer ritual meet. Participants prepare for days, building a large pyramid-shaped wooden structure at the central fire. On the night of the full moon, the community gathers from all corners of the plateau for drumming, chanting, singing, dancing, and a powerful OM shared by hundreds of voices. The flames rise high, illuminating faces and sending sparks into the sky, creating a collective emotional intensity. The following morning, the entire gathering enters a voluntary silence, no talking until the food circle, which turns the landscape into a quiet, reflective field. This silence fast deepens the inward turn, making the land, the fire, and the presence of others feel even more immediate. Combined, these experiences show how movement, ritual, and shared time shape an inner world that is inseparable from the natural spaces in which the gathering unfolds. In the third layer, the thesis zooms all the way into the inner voices of the people at the Mediterranean Rainbow Gathering. The author weaves together interviews with 8 participants and presents them as if everyone was sitting together in one big sharing circle, speaking in turn. Instead of treating their words as raw data, the text lets their experiences breathe. People talk about why they came, how they feel in nature, what the gathering means to them, and how it contrasts with their regular lives in the city. This format mirrors the actual practice of circle sharing at rainbow gatherings and turns the chapter itself into a kind of written circle. When participants talk about interiority, they rarely use abstract philosophical language. They describe turning inwards as becoming more honest with themselves, softening defenses, and feeling their emotions more clearly. For some, inner life is directly connected to the body, breathing, walking barefoot, feeling the river, or sitting quietly by the fire. Others speak of inner experience as an ongoing practice, learning to listen to intuition, noticing how they react to others, or observing their thoughts without judgment. This inner shift is not separate from the gathering, it is triggered and supported by the simple lifestyle, the absence of phones and schedules, and the constant reminder to be present. Their view of nature is equally personal. Many say that in the valley they feel nature as a living, responsive presence rather than a backdrop. The cliffs, river, trees, and weather are experienced as active partners in their inner process, offering comfort, challenge, or reflection. People talk about feeling held by the canyon walls, cleansed by the cold water, or awakened by the sounds of birds and the river. Nature becomes both mirror and teacher, showing them their fears, their limits, and their capacity to relax and trust. This animistic, relational view echoes the older, pre-modern perspectives discussed earlier in the thesis, but here it is lived, not just theorized. When they speak about rainbow and Babylon, participants draw a sharp emotional contrast. Rainbow is often described as home, family, or a temporary paradise, a place where they can be their authentic selves, feel accepted, and experiment with new ways of living and relating. Babylon, by contrast, is their word for modern capitalist, urban life, rushed, stressful, competitive, full of judgment and superficial roles. Some describe Babylon as a system that narrows inner life, numbs the body, and disconnects people from each other and from the earth. The gathering gives them a chance to step outside that system for a while, to remember different values, cooperation, sharing, slowness, play, and to see more clearly what feels sick or broken in their ordinary world. Finally, many interviewees emphasize the circle itself as a powerful spiritual and emotional space. Sitting on the ground, hand in hand, facing one another with the fire or the food in the middle, they feel equality and connection, no stage, no audience, no above or below. People say that speaking from the heart in a circle, while others listen without interrupting, helps them feel seen and heard in ways they rarely do elsewhere. The act of physically forming a circle is experienced as creating a new kind of space, half visible and half invisible, where individual inner worlds link up into a shared field. In this sense, the circle is not just a seating arrangement, it is itself a practice of turning inwards together, and it becomes one of the clearest examples of how rainbow gatherings turn inner experience into a collective, spatial reality. The conclusion ties together all the layers explored throughout the thesis, historical theory, on-site fieldwork, and participant interviews, to show how rainbow gatherings generate 3 interconnected forms of inner experience. The physical/structural layer comes from the land itself and the temporary infrastructures people build. The experiential/spatial layer emerges as participants move through the landscape and daily rituals, and the shared, spoken interiority layer appears in circles, conversations, and interviews where people articulate what the gathering means to them. These layers overlap to create a full picture of how inner life is shaped by both natural space and communal practice. The thesis frames rainbow gatherings as a form of counter-Babylon, meaning an intentional break from mainstream capitalist, urban society. In this temporary world, values like non-commercial living, cooperation, slowness, collective decision-making, and respect for nature replace the speed, competition, and individualism associated with everyday life. Living simply outdoors without money becomes a form of resistance, not in a confrontational sense, but by modeling an alternative way of being human, one rooted in presence, community, and ecological awareness. At the same time, the conclusion emphasizes that rainbow gatherings are limited by design. They are temporary, lasting only a moon cycle. They rely on basic, low-tech solutions for water, shelter, sanitation, and food, and they lack the stable infrastructure needed for long-term living. While they offer powerful inner and communal experiences, they cannot fully substitute for the complexity of modern society. Instead, they function as temporary experiments, spaces where people can remember or discover alternative values before returning to their everyday lives. Looking ahead, the thesis imagines a future synthesis in which the spirit of rainbow gatherings, deep ecological connection, communal care, spiritual openness, could blend with the useful aspects of modern knowledge and technology. Rather than choosing between primitive simplicity and high-tech civilization, the author envisions a balanced society that honors inner life and nature while still benefiting from scientific and technological advancements. In this vision, rainbow gatherings serve as prototypes for more harmonious, holistic ways of living, pointing toward possibilities that are not yet fully realized in mainstream culture. The 2021 Arcdenis Mediterranean Rainbow Gathering took place between 13 March and the 12th of April in Mersin's Limonlu Çogleon Valley, with the author present from 3 to 11 April. The journey begins with the author and his partner accepting the invitation to the gathering, a simple message that feels more like a mysterious calling than an event announcement. They pack their gear, excitement and curiosity swelling as they leave Istanbul by bus on the early morning of April 3rd. After hours of travel, they reach Mersin's main station, then a minibus to Limonlu, and at last a small local service vehicle takes them to the final point where roads end and the wilderness begins. Before entering the deep canyon, they meet an elderly local man. The author feels some anxiety, uncertain how the villagers perceive the rainbow people. But the man warmly tells them he has visited the gathering area himself. He describes the rainbow folk as odd types, but kind and good people, easing the author's fears and marking the first softening of the boundary between Babylon, modern society, and the temporary rainbow world awaiting inside. Following the instructions from the invitation booklet, almost like a treasure map, they walk along the river, past ancient Roman water channels carved into the rock, past old church ruins, and deeper into the steep, echoing valley. The path winds through a magical canyon trail, crossing cool, rushing river water, surrounded by cliffs dotted with cave-like hollows. Every sound is amplified by the stone walls, the river's constant roar, the wind threading through narrow passages, their own footsteps softened by damp earth. The author describes the environment as a kind of threshold, nature slowly drawing them away from ordinary time and into a more cyclical, quiet, and watchful world. When they finally emerge from the canyon's tight corridor into a small meadow, they see the heart of the gathering, the Kuzul Ateş, the sacred fire, set in a grassy clearing between towering cliffs. Above them the rock walls rise sharply on both sides. Below, the cold Limonlu River cuts its way through the valley floor. The landscape feels like a cradle of stone and sound. The ever-present roar of the waterfall and river becomes a natural soundtrack to their first moments in the rainbow world. The author notes the caves in the cliff faces. They watch sunlight travel across the steep canyon walls as the day continues, something that creates a strong sense of vertical time, marked by shadow and light. This natural enclosure becomes their new home. The gathering is small, about 50 people, so everyone seems to develop a sense of shared presence quickly. The days are calm, intimate, almost village-like. The author experiences the Sekirtkal Hissi, the feeling of a small core family, unique to smaller rainbow gatherings. People welcome them gently, some waving, some smiling from near the fire. Conversations are soft, simple, based on practicalities, where to set up a tent, where the toilets are, when the food circle might happen. Names aren't so important, roles, moods, and energies are more noticeable. The author immediately feels the shift from observer to participant. The line between researcher and family member dissolves in the valley's timelessness. The days follow natural cycles. Sunlight enters the valley late and leaves early because of the high cliff walls. Mornings are cold, everyone wraps themselves in blankets and shawls around the sacred fire. Tea is brewed slowly, people stretch, meditate, or sit silently. Food is cooked communally in a simple kitchen area. Meals happen in a circle, people sitting on the ground, waiting in silence, breathing together, and then chanting Om before eating. The author notes how silence, collective breath, and shared waiting create a deeply felt sense of unity. These practices transform simple actions, like eating, into rituals. During the days, the author walks along the river and through nearby trails. The canyon scenery constantly shifts, damp air near the water, cold pockets of shade behind boulders, warm sunlight patches where the cliffs open. At times the valley feels like a corridor to an older world, untouched, echoing, sacred. He notices the interplay of physical and inner landscapes. As the terrain becomes rougher or gentler, his thoughts and feelings shift in parallel. The valley acts as a guide, pushing him inward as much as forward. At night, the sacred fire becomes the center of gravity. Songs rise from the group, some in English, some in Turkish, others wordless and melodic. Drums pulse softly against the walls of the canyon. The fire illuminates faces, reveals fleeting silhouettes, and melts the boundaries between strangers. The sky above the canyon is narrow, framed by steep rock. Stars move slowly across the slit of visible night. The author often sits watching the moon move through the narrow opening overhead, feeling the night deepen in sync with the group's energy. He describes how the fire rewires time, the mechanical clock fades. Instead, rhythm comes from breath, flames, footsteps, and the moon's changing position. During the gathering, the author conducts interviews with 8 participants, using a small audio recorder. These conversations happen while sitting by the fire, walking through the valley, or resting near the river. People speak about interiority, nature, modern society, Babylon, and the healing power of the circle. Their voices blend lived experience with philosophy. Many describe feeling seen, grounded, or transformed by living simply and closely with nature. These shared reflections deepen the author's own inward journey. Throughout his stay, the author becomes increasingly aware of the contrast between the rainbow world and Babylon. In the valley, everything feels cyclical, fluid, collective. Outside, life is linear, scheduled, individualistic. This tension becomes a recurring internal theme. Each evening, as the fire burns, he feels more embedded in the valley's holistic life network, a sense of merging with environment, community, and self. When it is time to leave, the author walks once more through the river path, past the caves, past the ancient water channels, reclaiming the weight of the backpack and the rhythm of ordinary walking. The valley seems to hold its breath as they exit. The boundary is crossed quietly. Civilization returns, the road, the vehicles, the noise. Yet something of the valley remains inside, a sense of expanded inner space, shaped by firelight, river sound, and the simple presence of 50 strangers who briefly became family. The 2022 World Rainbow Gathering took place between 25 September and the 25th of October in Antalya's Ibret Plateau, with the author present from 8 to 16 October. The journey to the 2022 World Rainbow Gathering begins in rain. The author and his partner reach the welcome area soaked, carrying their gear through a forested path that opens suddenly into the vast, fog-covered expanse of Inef Plateau. After the shadowed protection of the trees, the wide, open plain feels like stepping into a different realm altogether, flat, endless, edged by dark pines on all sides. The central sacred fire flickers in the distance, a warm pulse beneath drifting mist. People walk slowly across the clearing, silhouettes moving in and out of the fog. Though visibility is low, the landscape feels huge and exposed, like the sky has dropped down to meet the earth. The welcome center is crowded with new arrivals taking shelter from the storm. Thunder rolls across the plateau, and rain intensifies in waves. A seasoned rainbow elder gathers the newcomers for a focus, calmly sharing the guidelines, rhythms, and gentle rules of rainbow life: how to care for the land, how the kitchen works, where the sacred spaces are, how to participate with awareness. Despite the storm, the atmosphere is warm. People crowd together, sharing blankets, laughing softly, waiting for the downpour to ease. When the rain calms, the author and his partner shoulder their packs and head into the open plain toward the tree-lined edge where camps cluster. The fog shifts constantly, revealing and hiding figures, teepees, cooking areas, and the scattered geometry of the communal spaces. As they walk, the plateau opens in all directions, golden grasses flattened by wind, long lines of pine trees curved around the edges, low mountains rising beyond. Somewhere toward the center burns the Ana Ates, the great mother fire, the heart of the gathering. When they finally reach it, the fire glows dimly through fog, encircled by people who appear and disappear like spirits as the mist thickens and thins. This becomes home for the next week, a place where time is marked by weather, by the movement of clouds, by firelight, by footsteps across dry earth. The first days are shaped by storms. Tents shake in the wind, people huddle near the fire, sharing stories, cups of herbal tea, and warmth. But the rain also brings a shared sense of resilience and unity. Strangers help one another secure tarps, dig small drainage channels, and keep the fire alive through wet nights. When the sun finally returns, the entire plateau transforms. The wide clearing blazes gold, the dry grass is shimmering. The mountains come into sharp view and the sky feels impossibly large. The author walks through the newly revealed landscape, noticing how enormous and open everything is compared to the enclosed intimacy of the 2021 Canyon Gathering. The gathering is massive, over 1,000 people at its peak, especially on the night of the full moon ceremony. Camps stretch far around the forest edge: the kids' village, the music temple, the tea house, pirate camp, the kitchen complex with its washing stations, ovens, and storage pits. The scale creates a sense of wandering through a temporary village or ancient nomadic city. Each area has its own sounds: drumming in one direction, children laughing in another, quiet meditation further away. Paths form organically in the grass as people walk the same routes between fire, kitchen, and forest. When the full moon approaches, the atmosphere becomes electric. A group constructs a massive pyramid-shaped wooden structure at the center of the fire circle, a ritual bonfire built with intention and symbolism. As darkness falls, people gather from all corners of the plateau. Drums pulse in the distance, voices chant, and the air vibrates with anticipation. When the pyramid is finally lit, flames roar upward, higher than a person, illuminating hundreds of faces. The plateau glows orange against the night sky. People dance, sing, howl, move in spirals around the fire. The author feels himself swept into a collective rhythm that is both ancient and improvisational. The moon climbs above the valley edge, emerging vast and bright, and for hours the gathering becomes a single breathing organism. The next morning, silence blankets the land. As part of the full moon tradition, nobody speaks until the communal meal. Thousands of people walk, cook, meditate, or sit quietly in the sun. The author experiences an unusual stillness, a huge community of humans living together without words, listening only to footsteps, birds, wind through pines, and the crackling of small cooking fires. When the food circle begins, everyone sits together, hundreds of bodies forming concentric rings, and the collective Om rises into the open sky, turning the silence into a shared vibration that feels both grounding and expansive. As the days continue, the author becomes deeply attuned to the rhythm of plateau life. The sun arcs slowly across the wide sky, unbroken by canyon walls, nights grow cold quickly, and the fire becomes the central gathering place again, where strangers share songs, tea, and stories. Without electricity, phones, or artificial light, the cycles of day and night shape everything. People wake with the sun, together, walk long distances between camps, nap in the shade of pines, and return to the fire as darkness falls. The plateau, though vast, becomes familiar through repeated movement. Certain trees, rocks, and paths become landmarks in this temporary world. Throughout the week, the author feels the contrast between this communal, improvised, land-rooted life and the structured, technological world outside, the one rainbow people call Babylon. Here, life feels slower, more embodied, more cyclical. Tasks like washing dishes, gathering wood, carrying water, or preparing food take time and shared effort. Conversations happen naturally, with openness. People speak of their reasons for coming, seeking healing, community, adventure, or simply a different way of being human for a while. When it is time to leave, the plateau feels both enormous and intimate. Tents are taken down, fire pits cleaned, trash packed out, compost pits filled. The author walks back across the plain, through the forest, toward the road leading back to ordinary life. The land grows quieter behind him, smoke from the last cooking fires drifts upward and disappears into the blue. What remains is a sense of having lived inside a temporary village built from nothing but intention, cooperation, and the landscape itself, a world that existed for a single moon cycle and will never exist again in exactly the same form.